What were the dark family secrets you finally learned when you were old enough? Story 1. I found out that my favorite cousin wasn't missing. All I knew growing up, he was 13 years older than me, was that he would come and go a lot. He lived with us when I was a baby, and after he moved out, he would visit us every 6 months or so out of the blue. We never visited him or called him. His visits were one of my favorite things in the world. I loved him like a brother. By the time I was a teenager, I understood that he had issues with his parents. They had kicked him out, so my parents took him in. I know that kind of childhood messes with you. So in between visits to my parents, he avoided the rest of the family, moved around a lot, and didn't hold jobs for long. That's why my parents didn't always know where he was. But in my later teens, he stopped coming over altogether. I asked repeatedly if anyone had heard from him, and I was told no. I asked about contacting him, and I was told that no one had a phone number or address for him. They said he would come around if he felt like it, but it stretched on for years. I was really worried that he was dead, and I really missed him. In my late 20s, I finally found out that everyone knew where he was all along. He was in prison for a heinous crime. From what I heard, it was actually somewhat done in defense of his new wife, whom I never got to meet. I also found out some super messed up things about how the extended family sided with his crazy parents and refused to help him or his wife when he got arrested. They even shamed my dad into not helping either. I tried to send him a message in prison, but I don't know if he ever got it. I wish he knew that I didn't turn my back on him for decades like everyone else did. I just didn't know. What a plot twist. I guess life is just full of surprises and you never really know what's going on with someone. Story 2. I'm still a secret to at least one family. I'm adopted and I found my biological father, who begged me not to reach out to any of my half-siblings because it would ruin his life and standing in the community. The sad thing is, I'm not even his first secret child. I have an older half-sister who he also begged never to reach out to, so that's 2 kids he's had because he cheated on his wife. I can only imagine how often he cheats to have at least 2 women end up pregnant. My half-sister and I met through 23andMe, which we jokingly call 23 and Mark because who knows how many more kids our biological father might have out there. I'm pretty sure he's been terrified since at-home DNA kits became a thing. I tried to answer as many of your questions as I could, but I thought I'd clear up some of the most repeated ones here. Why don't I tell his wife? Well, I don't need to. She already knew about my half-sister and now me because she answered his phone when I first called asking questions and told me to leave her family alone. Well, screw him for asking me to stay quiet. Why don't I blow up his life or reach out to my half-siblings? It's largely because of my half-siblings that I haven't done anything. I didn't sign up to be a wrecking ball or to destroy a family. Imagine finding out that everything you knew about your dad was a lie in the worst way possible. I know I'd be devastated. I may not have met them yet, but they're my half-siblings. They're just as innocent in this as I am. I don't want to be the one to hurt them like that. I really hope that he'll realize he can't keep a secret like this forever and come clean himself. Why not mail his kids DNA kits anonymously? Realistically, it's only a matter of time before one of them gets curious and does it on their own, or gets gifted one from an unwitting family member or friend. Why don't I blackmail or extort the dirtbag? He's a terrible person and he should pay. It's pretty simple. That's just not the kind of person I am. I don't want his money. Never have. I go to bed every night with a clear conscience, which is more than I can say for him. That's worth more than anything money could buy, in my opinion. I have a roof over my head, a husband who loves me, a beautiful daughter, a great dad, and 2 new half-siblings that I adore. From my perspective, I'm already rich. Story 3. My grandfather was an amazing guy. He was a sniper paratrooper in World War II. He always refused to talk about the army, but I learned later that he was dishonorably discharged after an injury. Turns out the sergeant in his squad was a real jerk. My grandfather had to go behind enemy lines to set up a post and the plane was flying too low for a safe jump. He protested to the sergeant, who called him a coward and shoved him and his buddy out of the plane. Both my grandfather and his spotter partner were seriously injured in the landing. His partner, I never knew him, was paralyzed, and my grandfather broke some bones. They were both rescued shortly after and taken to a military hospital, but that's not what got my grandfather discharged. The sergeant showed up to visit them in the infirmary, and my grandfather punched him square in the face with his only good hand, twice. According to his only army buddy who ever knew, who was also visiting at the time, he knocked the guy out cold. After that, and on top of his injuries, the army sent my grandfather home for the rest of the war. After my grandfather passed away, we went through his belongings and found a bunch of newspaper and article clippings about the people involved. We also found a bunch of unsent letters that my grandfather had written to his sergeant. We also found photos of my grandfather's squad, including the 2 buddies that he lost in the incident that got him discharged. It was heartbreaking. I never knew any of this about my grandfather. He was such a fun, kind, and goofy guy. You'd never have thought that anything like this could happen to him. Now I understand why my parents always said never to bring the army around him. I miss you, Grandpa. I would have punched that jerk too. Story 4. My dad never knew his biological father. He was a war baby and my grandma refused to talk about him. After she died, my dad started asking questions among surviving family members, but everything was so long ago, right after World War II, that he only had a little bit of information. I was able to find his dad using the information in DNA through Ancestry, but he had passed away a few years ago. I never contacted the guy's family, but there are a bunch of people who show up as half-siblings to my dad through DNA matches. They're from all over the country and don't show up in the biological grandfather's official family tree. My dad was a bit disappointed, so I tracked down my grandfather. Turns out he was also a bit of a player and fathered kids and left them all over the place. According to what my dad could gather, my grandma and grandpa dated and she got pregnant. Grandpa was in the military and had the opportunity to extend his assignment there, but he decided not to. My grandma was really hurt by this and refused to talk about him. Apparently, the old man's mom asked for my dad to be sent to her to be raised since my grandma was only around 19. This means the guy's parents at least knew about my dad. It looks like there are at least 4 other kids born out of wedlock, plus 1 son from a marriage.
What was the worst time you walked in?
Rufus Rugs, open up! Sorry for barging in like that, but I just had to share the sponsor of today's video. Me and the boys from Rufus Rugs. Now you might be saying to yourself,
excuse me, what the actual are you doing in my house?
But I can assure you're gonna like this. We've been hard at work creating the best quality and premium hand-tufted rugs money can buy. Now imagine this. You, chilling on your bed, watching a Rufus Stories video, and staring at a rug that's not just a rug. Nope, it's a masterpiece. It's the kind of rug that makes your friends wish they were you. But they're not. And the best part is that these aren't your average cheap quality rugs. Nope, each one is handcrafted by me and the boys. No shortcuts, no robot assembly lines, and no dropshipping BS. Just pure rug grind. Whether you love anime, sports, cars, or anything else you can think of, we can turn it into a rug. So click the first link in the description and have your custom idea come to life.
Story 5. My dad used to send me birthday cards every year when I was a kid. My mom left him while pregnant with me for a good reason. Even though I never met him, I was glad to get a card from him with a few bucks, acknowledging I existed and that he wanted to see me someday. Sometime in my teens, I learned that my mom had written all those cards and my grandpa would mail them to us so it looked legit. I never actually got a card from him. My dad was a bad guy. Without airing all my family's dirty laundry, he was a creep. I eventually met him twice, once at my aunt's funeral where he wrote me a long letter about how he wished he was better, and once when he tried to start a relationship with me. He gave me bad vibes and never responded to his attempts to reach out after that. I'm better off without him. My mom raised 2 kids on her own. Unfortunately, my family has its issues. We struggle with alcoholism and my mom has serious mental health problems. Growing up with her wasn't always easy, and it still isn't today. Some days she's lucid and a great mom, other days she's ruthless and unstable. But deep down, when she's well and not being affected by her illness, she's an incredible and kind mom. I just have to accept that she's unwell and try to remember the good times. My family and I are estranged these days, but it makes me want to work harder to be a stable and loving mom if I ever become one. At the end of the day, I still love my mom and I'm grateful that she's protected me from him. Story 6. My grandfather did a really messed up thing with his younger brother to avoid going to Vietnam. He, his brother, and 2 of their friends had their numbers called in the draft. They didn't want to go, but they were broke and all had families to support. If they got arrested, they'd lose their jobs and their families would lose their income. So they came up with a different plan. They would drive to get their medical exams done, and on the way, they would crash the car into a tree. The plan was to get injured enough to not be sent to war, but not so injured that they would be permanently disabled. They had to make it look like an accident so no one would get arrested. This was in rural Western Australia, so they were all going to say they swerved to miss a kangaroo. My grandfather was driving, his friend was in the passenger seat, and the other 2 were in the back. His brother was behind the passenger seat. They hit the tree at about 25 miles per hour, enough to be serious. They definitely weren't going to war. The problem was that they weren't wearing seatbelts. This was rural Australia in the 60s and everyone knew that seatbelts were for sissies. Plus they wanted to make the crash look as bad as possible. No one found them or their car for an hour or so, and no one had considered internal injuries. My grandfather's brother was hurt really bad in the back seat. He was dead before they got to a hospital. My grandfather never forgave himself. He never talked about it to anyone. My grandma was the only one he ever told, and she didn't tell my mom and me until after he died. We found a box in their bedroom when we were cleaning out the house after she passed away last year. It had a clipping from the local newspaper about the accident. It said that they had swerved to miss a kangaroo and called it a tragedy. I don't think my mom told any of her siblings, so this is technically still a family secret. I guess you're all in on it now. Yo, war isn't no joke, man. It's a dark and twisted reality that can break even the strongest people. I hope we never have to experience it again, but if you're with me on that, then hit the like button and subscribe. Story 7. My stepdad was a lifelong alcoholic. As a kid, he even taught me how to mix his favorite drink, and I would mix it for him in the living room like a pro. I don't remember what it was made of, though. He was also a bit of a weirdo. I liked spending time with him because he was funny, but I never saw the dark side of his alcoholism. He never made me drink, so he didn't have a negative impact on me personally, but before I was born, he would get so drunk that he would threaten to hurt my grandma. Once after a car accident, he came home bleeding and delusional, claiming that my grandma had hurt him. He even threw away some of my parents' wedding photos. I never knew how horrible he could be. Maybe it was because he was kind to us kids. He would make me cocoa and watch Garfield with me when I was little. It was never a bad influence in my life, so it was really weird to me when I found out all of these things. Before he passed away, he really regretted his drinking and stopped completely. He also became really depressed until his granddaughter was born. He He was so happy to have a grandchild. He died a sober man who regretted everything, but he was happy to have met his one and only biological granddaughter. Despite everything, he really changed in the end. Everyone was really upset when he passed away. Story 8. I come from El Salvador and my family has a lot of secrets. Here are a few that I can share. My grandfather let some men go free after they hurt my cousin. They don't get along. My aunt got pregnant young by a much older man and they got married, but her family kicked him out when they found out. My dad tried to hurt my mom when she was pregnant, and he was mean to her all the time. My oldest aunt left my mom in a park alone when she was a kid. She was eventually taken in by someone else. My grandparents don't like me because I'm the product of a bad relationship, and I'm not white. My grandfather used to punish his kids in very harsh ways, even threatening my cousin. My mom was born during a war in my country, and almost all of her siblings saw the war firsthand. My oldest uncle was captured by soldiers during the war, and his body was never found. My oldest cousin's dad died in a strange accident while fishing at night. They said a crocodile was involved. When my mom was little, my grandfather hurt my grandmother and she lost her memory for a while. We don't know what happened. I could go on for hours, but these are the ones I can share for now. Story 9. My dad met my mom in the Philippines when he was stationed there in the Navy. They got married and had me, but then he had to go back to the States to finish his tour of duty. My mom moved to America a month before I was born and stayed with relatives in Texas. Meanwhile, my dad's tour ended in Hawaii where he met another woman. He called my mom and asked for a divorce, saying that he wanted to take back his recent marriage to her because of a one-night stand. My mom was already scared and alone, being in a new country and not speaking much English. Now she was pregnant, about to give birth, and her husband was abandoning her. My Texan uncle was furious. He flew to Hawaii and threatened to teach my dad a lesson, but somehow managed to talk to him into being a man and taking responsibility for his wife and child. The fact that the other woman had dumped him probably helped. My dad was back by the time I was born. I learned all of this when I was still a child, around the time my parents got divorced. It was just the first of many dark family secrets that I would come to learn as a teenager. Story 10. When I was a kid, I was told that my maternal uncle died unexpectedly from cancer. I had already experienced the deaths of my grandfather and another uncle in the past 2 years, so I was familiar with death and funerals. My uncle's casket was closed, and when I asked my mom why, she said that it was his family's wish and that we shouldn't talk about it anymore. Years later, I was staying with my paternal grandmother, who was known for her strong religious beliefs. One day, we were talking about the afterlife, and she bluntly said that my uncle was punished in Inferno's flames because he had hurt himself. I was confused and asked her what she meant, and she explained that self-harm is a sin that leads to doom. That conversation has stayed with me ever since. My grandmother was a kind and caring woman, but she was also very straightforward and honest. She sometimes spoke harshly because of her religious beliefs. Afterwards, she hugged me and baked me some cookies, apologizing for having to tell me the truth about my uncle's death. Story 11. Last year, a family friend passed away. We met because our daughters did karate together. I was friends with both him and his wife, still friends with his wife. He was already in his 70s when we met, and his wife was about 20 years younger than him. He had a fascinating life story, and I wanted to record it for his daughter. She was going through a tough time as a teenager, and she acted badly towards him. Based on my own difficult teenage years and experiences with my dad, I felt that she might one day want to know him better, especially since he was already quite old and not in great health. I felt bad that she would likely only get to know her dad as an adult, so I spent several hours with him recording his stories from his life. It was really interesting. After he passed away, I sent the recordings to his wife on USB drives. She got back to me and said that they had just thrown them away. It came out that he had mistreated his daughter. I felt absolutely gut-punched and so angry at this old guy who was fun, funny, and a bit stubborn. Story 12. My cousin Terry's engagement fell apart just before the wedding, and I only recently learned the full story. Terry and Joan got engaged after she got pregnant. Things were fine at first, but then Terry's mom, Isis, became seriously ill and nearly died. Terry asked Joan if they could postpone the wedding until Isis recovered so she could attend. Instead, Joan called off the wedding entirely over the phone. When Terry went home to see her, he found that their home had been cleaned out and all of his belongings were gone, including their bed. Terry called Joan and her parents, but no one answered. He went to her parents' house and found it empty as well. There was no note, no trace of them. All of their social media accounts and phone numbers had been deactivated. Even Joan's siblings didn't know where they had gone. It turned out that Joan and her family had packed up their belongings and moved across the country. They would have moved overseas if Terry hadn't found them. Joan had tried to leave the country with her baby just because Terry wanted his mom to attend their wedding. This whole ordeal lasted for 3 years, and after a long legal battle, Terry won primary custody of their child. He's now a single dad who cherishes every moment he has with his son. I don't know what happened to Joan, and I'm not going to ask. Story 13. My great-grandfather was a political extremist and was sentenced to a severe punishment. His sentence was later reduced, but some people debate whether this was fair. My other great-grandfather was harmed in front of my grandfather, who survived and was injured. My grandfather's mother knew who was responsible, but she refused to tell him or his brother so that they wouldn't seek retribution. She didn't tell them until her deathbed. Then, my great-grandmother provided mystical guidance to a regional political figure during an important political decision. Her family may be exaggerating her role, but I'd rather not go into detail. Additionally, my grandfather's brother was cherished by a renowned female poet. He was gay and passed away tragically young. This was kept hidden from the family because my grandfather's mother was very religious. My grandmother loved him dearly and never fully recovered from his death. Also, my grandfather was a skilled performer and was allegedly offered roles in Hollywood. He declined because he believed the people there were too flamboyant. His brother, on the other hand, had minor roles in some minor films and carried himself like a celebrity. Some of these sound almost fabricated, but I believe those were simply interesting times to be alive. Story 14. My dad was married to another woman before he met my mom. They had a daughter, and my dad loved her so much that his wife became insanely jealous. My dad noticed some strange behavior from his wife towards their daughter, and when he tried to talk to her about it, she started arguing with him. He then left with their daughter to my uncle's house. My dad's wife knew that he would have left their daughter with my aunt while he was at work, so she called the police and said that my aunt had their child. The police came and took the girl away from my aunt. My aunt immediately tried to call my dad, but my dad's wife drove back home, put toxic chemicals in her daughter's milk, and forced her to drink it. When my dad arrived, he found his daughter cold and alone. My dad's wife was never found. My dad never got justice for his first child. When I was born, my mom named me after my late half-sister. We have the same name, that's how I found out the whole story. I asked my parents about my name, and they told me everything. I know this is messed up and cruel, but my family has a lot of messed up stuff going on. This just seems like another thing that happened. My dad moved on and he's okay now. I have 4 siblings and we're all okay. This happened in Anápolis, Brazil in the 1980s, and it was reported in the local news. Dude, that story is so twisted it's giving me chills. I really hope karma comes back around and delivers swift justice to people such as that bad mom. Did you get goosebumps? I sure did. If you're intrigued by these dark tales, then you definitely don't want to miss What Are Some Very Creepy Facts. Story 2 had me so freaked out. See you there.